I felt overwhelmed for many years because of the level of care that Lance needed after he had his seizures. I had already been caring for him for a couple of years at that point, but prior to that, he had been able to do most things for himself still. I just couldn't leave him alone. After his seizures, I had to manage everything and just continuously adapt to his changing needs. Having things organized was essential, but it took me a while to get to that point. It took me a few years to get myself organized. So, in this episode, Jenna and I are going to talk about some of the things that I did, some of the practical things to keep myself organized and to make my life easier as Lance's caregiver.
This is not something that is a strong point for me. So you really had a big impact on me because this is not, like I said, something that comes naturally to me. So I've had a lot of opportunity to observe the things that you've done right. And I'm excited that we get to share this with other people.
As you were saying that, I was thinking, I really did a lot of that out of necessity because moving forward, it's been 4 years since Lance passed away. I am not nearly as organized as I was when I cared for him. And I'm working on getting back to being organized. I did it then because it helped me so much. And I do like it better when things are organized. So some of the things that I did to organize myself while I was caring for him were I had an entire supply closet. I thankfully had a lot of closet space in the home that we lived in, and I dedicated one closet to all of the supplies. That was where I kept everything, and it made it so easy for me to go and find things and then know what I needed to order or what was running low, whatever.
When I met you and saw that you always kept back stock of the things that you knew you were going to use, I thought that was really interesting. I hadn't seen that in anyone before, with the exception of people that I had met who, if I'm honest, they maybe tended toward being hoarders a little bit. So they would have stuff like under their bed, and they would have stuff shoved in the garage and in closets and just wherever they could, because they would find a good deal on something and buy 12 of them. And that always kind of turned me off because I'd never had that much extra storage space. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with that much stuff? Watching you and seeing, oh, being prepared and not running out of stuff has a lot of value, and it removes a lot of stress from your life. And when I got remarried, my husband always has an extra 2 or sometimes 3 of something that he knows he's going to use, whether it's laundry detergent or toothpaste. He does not like running out of things. And that took a lot of time for me to wrap my brain around, well, why would I buy more when we already have some? And he'd say, because you're going to run out.
Yes, that's really important to have those things so that you don't ever run out. And in our situation, it was because I couldn't just get in the car and run to the store. I had to have a caregiver there because most of the time I couldn't take Lance with me. And so I needed to make sure of that. There's also, if things were on sale, because we were on a limited budget, I would stock up on things when they were on sale. So that was another reason for having that back stock.
Well, I loved it. And I saw how it can be done in a healthy way that actually helps your life run better and keeps you out of that stressful space of, oh my gosh, I just ran out of toothpaste and I don't have any more. And I could have used that very much when I was raising little kids. I think that's a useful technique for anybody.
Well, I don't keep as much stuff now. I still have at least the next thing. Like when I open the last of something, I will get the next thing. I don't have the next 10. Sometimes I would have that when I was caring for Lance. I know that sounds excessive, but anything that I knew that he used a lot of, I made sure that we never ran out of it. And then there are some other things that I did to stay organized. I had 3 ring binders, and I had a little counter area next to my refrigerator that I kept all of my office things on. I had a binder for me, a binder for Lance, and I had binders for the caregivers. And then that way, everything was organized in that one area. And I knew where to find it, and the caregivers knew where to find any of that information too. So that helped a lot, having just that one little space right there. I kept his medications on the counter area there too, the ones that he needed to take during the day, but all of his medications that were not for that day, I kept in a locked cabinet in a locked room. And that was for safety reasons. He wasn't able to manage his medications anymore. And it's never a good idea to keep medications out in the open when you've got people in and out of your house. So that was a safety thing. And then as far as ordering them, he had some that were on 30-day supply, 60-day supply, and 90-day supply. So I kept them all in separate little containers so that I knew these need to be ordered every month, these need every 2 months, and these need to be ordered every 3 months. And I kept his medications organized in that way.
I love the 3 ring binder thing because that makes me think of almost like they were like manuals that you put together. So it was like the RuthAnn manual and the Lance manual and the caregiver manual. So it's like any questions, any information that you need, there's like this directory that you could thumb through, and there's your information that you need. And now we have files on phones and computers and stuff like that.
One of the things in keeping everything organized on paper is when you start doing things on your phone, you can get sidetracked and you can get lost in your phone. And I did not want that to happen to the caregivers. They were there to be focusing on Lance, and I didn't want them on their phones. It was not safe. It wasn't safe for me to be on my phone, because if I got lost in something in my phone, I'd look up and Lance wouldn't be there. And that wasn't safe for him to be walking around the house by himself.
That I think that's such a incredibly valid point, because it's so easy. You open that phone to look at a note or a file or something, and then you get a notification, or just out of habit, your finger goes to that social media or to Amazon or to whatever thing your little dopamine loving brain, says, "Oh, that sounds good right now." And you're not even consciously aware of it. So I think if you just remove that, then you can still get the information you need. You can still get what you need, but you remove that risk.
One of the other things was scheduling everything. I scheduled my entire life. I had the schedule in my phone. I had it on, I had paper calendars throughout the house, and I had a whiteboard that I kept everything on. And I just had it in multiple places so that I didn't forget anything, and my entire life was scheduled. I know that was really strange to you when you started working for us, or when you started coming over and training Lance and seeing how everything was scheduled.
Well, it was not something that I was familiar with. So to give a little background to that, I was homeschooled. My mom stayed home with us, and my dad was self-employed. And so we just didn't have schedules like most people do. Most of my life, I never had to be anywhere ever. The days were just fluid all the time. So then when I was on my own, I worked some. And then once I had kids, I stayed home and I homeschooled them for 8 years. We just didn't have appointments. There were occasional, but most people have a daily work or school schedule, places they have to be and things that have to be done at a specific time. And there's deadlines. And I had none of that until my oldest went into a public school when he was in 7th grade. So seeing that you had everything like on paper, this is what I'm doing at this time, this is what I'm doing at this time, and this, like, I don't want to call it a rigid schedule, but it was a very intentional schedule. That blew my mind. I was like, wow, how does this lady do this? But I think, again, it was the necessity. And I learned a lot from it.
Well, for us, I mean, scheduling is something that always came easy to me. I like having a schedule. I like knowing what's happening. But then Lance really needed that once his dementia started getting bad. And then I needed to start looking at things like his level of energy. We've talked about this in another episode, but being able to have everything scheduled, I could look at everything for a week and see these are all the things that are going to happen this week. Is he going to have the energy for all of this? Are we going to be able to manage this, or do I need to move things around? And so having everything scheduled helped me figure all of that out.
So, about the time I met you is when I made the conscious decision to be more organized with my time, because that was something I really, really struggled with. I I just wasn't good at, I think, at being, well, it's not just organized, but being able to do the things I wanted to do, because it was always kind of chaotic. I didn't know what I was doing tomorrow or the next week. And I would double book myself, or I would never book things because I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. So I thought, oh, if I have this in front of me, a visual, then I can organize my life. You really were instrumental in pushing me to that. So I used a paper schedule for about 5 years. And then maybe a year ago, I really got intentional about putting it on my phone. And so now I'm in your space of, I go somewhere and I think, oh, I don't know. Let me look at my phone, because I know I've got everything in there and I can't schedule anything without that. And I know that's probably a normal thing for most people. But for me, it was really, really quite new. And I felt I felt like I'd come into the 21st century.
Well, I do schedule things a lot more than most people do. So what you were seeing from me was probably not what most people do.
You know what, though? It's also helped me to be intentional about those times. And this has, I mean, it does apply to caregiving, because I notice that I will see people and I'll say, we need to get together. I just, when I say that, we should get together, we should have lunch, I just pull out that calendar and say, let's just pick a day. Let's do it right now. And I can do that because I've got my life organized. And it has helped me to actually follow through on the things I want to do. So that impacted you, I'm guessing, as a caregiver, correct?
Oh, definitely. That was the only way that I found time for myself, was putting it in my schedule. I had to be intentional about that, just like I was intentional about everything else. And I'm so glad I did that, because I still do that now. And so I still am very isolated. So when I talk to somebody about getting together to do something, or scheduling a Zoom call or a phone call, whatever it is, I schedule it right now, and I've got it on my calendar, and I send out reminders. That way I'm still intentional about doing these things that I want to do, to spend time with the people that I want to spend time with. And then one of the other things that really helped me as I was caring for Lance was doing food prep. It was something that took me a while to get used to doing, but he had so many dietary restrictions, and I had to be very careful about the foods that I brought into the house. So I limited the amount of processed foods, because they're not good for you anyway. But as a caregiver, I needed to have some, because I couldn't cook all the time. I just had too much to do. But having all that fresh produce in the house, it helped prepping it, washing it, cleaning it. However, I usually used vinegar and water to clean everything, and then got it all cut up and put into containers and stuck in the refrigerator. And that way it was available when it was time to eat, and all of that prep was already done. So that was huge. And that was something that I did have caregivers help me with too in the later years. So that was very helpful.
Do you still do that? Do you still do much food prep, or do you find that it doesn't really serve a purpose for you anymore?
I do a little bit of food prep. There are some things that I know I'm not going to eat if I just stick them in the refrigerator. So, like if I get a thing of grapes, I'll clean them all and I'll take them all off of this stems, and then they're ready to eat. Because otherwise, I just look at them like, that's too much work.
I'll say that in my younger years, when I was taking care of small children, I think that would have been a really useful skill had I adopted that into my life at that point. So I wish I had had you as a mentor back then to help me, because no, seriously, I think of the amount of food that went to waste because I would get behind and it couldn't take care of it in that moment. So just being proactive, thinking, if I just do this now, then I'll have it when I need it.
Well, we still had food waste because Lance would end up going into the hospital and he'd be there for a week or two, and I'd spend the whole time at the hospital with him. So there were times when I was able to donate that food to somebody, but a lot of times we did end up wasting food. But if he wasn't in the hospital, it did help with the not having the food waste because I had done the food prep. But then also, what I would do is I always made really big meals. There was just the two of us, but if I made more than enough, then I had some to freeze and I had some for leftovers for the next day. So it cut down on the number of times that I had to cook during the week too. So that was another thing that was really helpful, was having those leftovers, which did take a while to get used to because Lance didn't like leftovers when we were first married. So he had to get used to that. And then the other thing is being able to prioritize everything, being organized and being able to prioritize all of those things. That was huge. And so that was something that I am pretty good at prioritizing, but when I was caring for him in the beginning, especially after he had those seizures, so that was 10 years before he passed away, it took me a while to get to the point where I figured out how to prioritize everything because it was so stressful and I was living in a fog.
Was it like trial and error, or was it just increased understanding of what you needed in your day to day? What helped you to be able to get that right?
I think it was just the increased understanding, really seeing what his needs were. And that's how I prioritized, was by his needs first. And if we had caregivers in the house, then they came second. And then I came third, sometimes fourth. It depended. We also had a dog for those first few years. And so he came before I did too. I was always last, but that's how I prioritized, was by his needs. And then as his needs changed, the priorities changed.
You say you were last, but we've talked about self-care. So you would necessarily need to have times when you did prioritize your own care and well-being. And how did that take you a while to figure that out and to integrate that into caring for him?
It did. And I learned very early on because he was sick for 25 years. So after his second diagnosis, I always said that I was thankful for the first diagnosis because that first diagnosis did teach me that I needed to take care of myself. But as his disease progressed, it was harder for me to make myself a priority because he needed so much. And I didn't have enough help. So that was where my calendar came in, because I made sure that I scheduled my counseling appointments and my time at the gym. And that was when I scheduled my caregivers, when I did have them, was so that I could go to counseling and so that I could go to the gym. And those were the things that I did to take care of myself.
I think that's so important to stress, that when you're caring for someone, you have to be able to sort out the the parts about yourself that can be moved way down on the priority list versus the things that really need to be brought up to the top to keep yourself in a space where you can continue to care for that person. So I think that prioritization is such an important thing that I imagine like people miss, because I would imagine you get in, or you could get into a kind of a frantic, like chaotic space where there's so many things coming at you all at once and you're just shooting from the hip, and you maybe don't have a good idea of which direction you should be going on any given day. So being able to stop, like take a minute, step back and say, okay, what is the most important thing in each day, in each week, in each month, and start to kind of build that out so that you're ahead of that kind of chaos curve rather than always behind it and having things happen to you, because things are going to happen to you, but you can control the things you can control.
Right. And I think that's an important thing to mention too, is that a lot of times caregiving happens when you don't expect it. And that's why it's so important to have a plan in place before you need it. And we don't live life like that. We don't walk around thinking, okay, I better plan for a disaster, but in this case, that was something that really helped me. And it was because Lance got sick so early in our marriage. And I learned a few things then before he needed me full time. So I'm glad that I at least had something in place, but I still didn't have enough in place. So I guess what I would want people to take away from this is start getting some things in place to plan for the potential that you may need some help, or that you may end up being a caregiver at some point, or that you may end up needing care, because you never know. Lance was 37 when he had to completely retire from work, and I was 37 when I quit my job to stay at home and take care of him. So it can happen at any time. And being prepared for that, even in a little way, is going to help so much. So I think that that's enough for this episode. We do have more to talk about, but we'll go ahead and put that in another episode. So thanks for joining me, Jenna, and I will see you next time.
All right. Thanks. It's been fun. Bye.